Welcome to our What Tenants Actually Want webinar. It's good to have you here. I can see more than 50 people joined. Uh, Today, we're going to talk about what main shifts do we see in what tenants want, how these changes now since we have economic downturn, we have inflation, especially here in Europe. Maybe that has some impact on the tenant preferences as well. What we did together with our co-host company, Parcel Tracker, is that we run a tenant survey among more than 300 people to see what kind of preferences they have. This was mostly conducted in student housing and co-living buildings. And it will give us, I think, some interesting and sometimes surprising information on what if the tenants demand more affordability, amenities, tech enablement, and so on. So this will be a great intro, I think, also to what's coming in 2023 and how can landlords act on that. As a first thing, can we do a quick introduction? If you can describe, guys, your roles. I should say that here Ben is the customer success manager at Spaceflow, and Arthur is the co-founder of Parcel Tracker. So yeah, guys, if you can give uh, a quick intro on what you do, and we'll also do a quick intro on what our companies do.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll jump in there. I would also like to add that we're going to introduce an icebreaker as well. So the little icebreaker is, what did you want to be when you grow up? And if everybody could participate in the chat, we're quite intrigued to see what all of you wanted to be at your 3-year-old selves. But as way of an introduction, my name's Ben. I'm one of the customer success managers here at Spaceflow. I have joined the company around about 6 months ago now, and then previous to that, I worked for another prop tech company in a similar role. It's essentially my job to make sure that our clients are getting the most out of Spaceflow. It's delivering success to their business. And in terms of what I wanted to be, my first career choice was a pirate, but the ethics behind that were questionable. So I then viewed Top Gun as a child of the 80s, and I decided I was going to be a naval aviator and one day date Kelly McGill's. But obviously, customer success found me.
Awesome. It's a pleasure. Sorry. I think I'll kick off by saying what I wanted to be when I was younger. And people who know me well just know I don't have good spelling, so they'd be surprised by this one, which is actually wanted to be an author when I was younger. And I don't know why, but I just have a clear, vivid picture of wanting a desk with very nicely sharpened pencils on it. So who knows? In terms of what I do, I'm one of the co-founders at Parcel Tracker, and what we do is we help buildings manage incoming and outgoing mail. So we'll dive into that a bit later. And we've been working on this for a while, and we started the company because we saw the issue firsthand with the front of house stuff. So yeah, it's going to be a pleasure to dig into the numbers we have today.
Great. I can see that people haven't yet submitted what they want to be as their 3-year-olds themselves, but we'll see. I think we can go now and dive deeper into the survey outcomes. So let me share my screen. Action steps for 2023. At the end, for about 10 minutes, we'll host the Q&A. You are able to already submit your questions through LinkedIn Live comment section, so feel free to do that even now. We will pick up those questions later at the end. The whole thing should be about 50 minutes, so I think we will end at around somewhere 10 minutes to 12, or maybe 12. We'll see how it goes. So I hope you have some good coffee, and we'll dive deep into this now. Before that, can we do a quick intro to the company? Can you tell us a little bit about that, Arthur?
Definitely. So, Parcel Tracker, our goal is to make parcel management easy. Um, the whole business came from the fact that I remember when I was living in student accommodation, when parcels were delivered to the front of house, you just see the color drain out of the people's face who had to actually handle all those deliveries in the building. So we wanted to make their lives easier. And if we kind of break down what we do is effectively we improve the efficiency of managing packages. We remove a lot of the manual processes using some smart computer vision. We make sure that parcels are never lost and that receptions are decluttered from packages.
And can you tell us a little bit more about the distribution? Like, uh, when do the tenants meet you? Usually, it's the student housing, it's the co-living, it's built to rent, or even commercial buildings.
Yeah, so we have over 160,000 units using us right now, and that's while we did start off in student accommodation and higher education, we have a lot of government buildings using us, healthcare, resi, offices, co-living, co-working. So basically, if it's a building which accepts packages, they actually end up using us, and it's been a really, really interesting journey to see the different use cases and the different needs of each client vertical. And some of the clients we work with are pretty cool. So yeah, you should check out some of our case studies. We've got some pretty high profile people there.
Yeah, don't hesitate to connect with Arthur on LinkedIn after to ask any questions about the company. So a little bit about Spaceflow. Ben, do you want to introduce the company?
Yeah, absolutely. So, excuse me. As it says here, we're an all-in-one tenant experience solution. So, managing things around sort of the community side of things, so that tenants can, functionalize or incorporate themselves into the community of the building, so that essentially they're not strangers to one another. They can interact with not just themselves, but with the building management company. We're also looking at things like digital operations, so communication within the building, being able to use the ticketing function to report issues, so that we can streamline those processes, make it easier, make it more efficient. There's things around now being able to upload documentation, whether that's something as simple as a microwave instruction manual or a copy of a specific tenant's rental contract. We can also facilitate bookings for amenities in the building. So if you have a gym, for instance, that can be booked, all of that kind of thing can be managed through the app. We're also looking at turning buildings and making them smarter. So this is through things such like mobile access, with integrations where they can simply swipe their phone and use that as their access card, visitor management systems, parcel management, facilitating such things as parcel tracker, and smart metering, obviously, aiming to make buildings more efficient, greener, huge thing in the news at the moment. So yeah, I guess as a small sentence, an all-in-one tenant experience platform.
Yes, and I would add that this is meant to be for the residential buildings as well as commercial buildings and anything in between, the mixed use, student housing, and so on. So yeah, a little bit about the survey that we conducted together with Parcel Tracker. We managed to have more than 300 people submitting their answers. Most of them, as you can see, were from the PBSA, Proposed Built Student Accommodation, and most of it were under age 35. In fact, the overwhelming majority was between 15 to 25-year old people, and most of them are also from the UK. So this was really mostly student accommodation people from the UK between 15 and 25. So now, before we reveal the results from this survey, we would actually we would like to ask you as an audience, what do you think was the most important for people living in student housing and co-living accommodation for their living experience? Is it location or a neighborhood? Is it size of apartment? Is it attractive interior design? Is it community? So feel free to go to this URL, menti.com, and use the code 1266959 to vote. And before we collect the results, I would say maybe 2 to 3 minutes. Would you be able, Arthur and Ben, to tell us what do you observe in the market is the most important for the tenants living in those properties?
I don't want to spill the beans just yet, but I guess the general feeling and the general observations I've had over the past few years working with hundreds of different buildings across asset classes is that don't always get excited by the shiny stuff. Really make sure that you have your core operations and the core value propositions of your business really nailed down, and make sure that you're doing the basics correctly before you start building around that, because as you as with building buildings, running them is the same thing. You don't want to be building on a shaky foundation.
I would echo those sentiments in terms of, you could have the most amazing building in the most amazing upmarket neighborhood going, the attractive interior design, but if the fundamentals of it don't work, things go wrong and they don't get sorted, there's a lack of communication, people will lose interest with it and people will become angry. They live in this beautiful building, but the fundamentals aren't working, and I think that tends to really, really annoy tenants. So yeah, get the foundations right, and I think you're onto a winner.
So let's see if we have already collected some of the results. Let me go to the live page of the results. We can see 7 people voting for community, 5 for location, and 1 for sports and wellness facilities. We don't really have any votes for sustainability, attractive interior design, or even size of apartment room, which is quite surprising. But let me see if we have any updates on it. No, it's still the same results. Let's see how this how is this echoed into the actual tenants survey result that we collected. And it turned out that the location and neighborhood was the single most important factor for the living experience of these young tenants at 75%. What was also important was the size of the apartment and room. On the other hand, and that was quite surprising for me, the sustainability practices, especially since we're talking about the younger generation, were not that important for this group of tenants. Let's go for a structure of this first question. As it was said, for the 3/4 of the respondents, the location and neighborhood was the most important. However, 20% it didn't play a big role for them. So as we all know from real estate, location, as they say, the most important thing, which was confirmed here in this tenant survey. I would ask you, what do you think the tenants of this group H are looking at in that location and neighborhood? What is it?
Is it all right if I jump in?
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at the amount of people that are essentially students and they're in a younger age group, I remember from when I wanted to be a student that I wanted to live as close to university as possible, but I also wanted to be near the pubs and bars, I'm afraid, because I wanted to party.
Sure.
And in terms of the accommodation that was on offer, there was a real mix of where I went. So I think they also look at the quality of what's on offer. You go to university, you get the older halls of residence, you get the newer halls of residence. So I'm probably going to want to be in the newest one that's close to uni and close to town. I want everything. I think maybe if you flip it on its head and look at the co-living tenants that we had, or kind of looking at the demographic side of things, then maybe they would want something slightly different in the ideal location. You know, if you're a young family, do you want to be living next door to the university and the pubs and the clubs? You probably don't. You probably want to be living in a nice leafy green suburb where you can go and get a cup of coffee, you can push your pushchair around, walk the dog in the park, those kind of things. So I kind of think it's entirely dependent on your audience. It will differ.
Arthur, do you have any add to that?
Definitely. Yes, definitely. So again, you know, like Ben said, location is very important, and depending on your demographic, location comes into play. But what you're looking for might be a bit different. Interestingly enough, living in London myself, the primary factor was definitely location. You either wanted to be close within walking distance of university or your work, or you wanted to be on the correct transit lines, right? So ideally not changing tube lines and then close enough to the tube station. So location, all that it really holds true. And no matter, and interestingly enough, a lot of the student accommodations which were really greatly located were quite old. But that being so, you know, they might not have been the fanciest and the newest ones. They were the ones which were always sold out the first in any university. And it's quite an interesting one that, you know, location trumps everything.
That perfectly relates to my next questions. You both reside in London. Can you see any new up-and-coming neighborhoods that are maybe full of these purpose-built student accommodation properties?
I mean, the up-and-coming neighborhood prospect of London is a constantly evolving thing. There is always the next new up-and-coming neighborhood. I've lived in London for 20 years, and I would say the up-and-coming neighborhood has changed every single one of those years as each one of them becomes more and more gentrified. I mean, you look at the city or sort of round about the Shoreditch area, just on the edges of the city. So for those that know London, round Liverpool Street Station and things like that, predominantly we're looking at business, banking, office space, co-working space. But you're now finding that more and more student blocks are now being built on top of these areas as well. So in and around sort of the Brick Lane area and kind of like round there, you know, you ventured to that area 20 years ago, people would be like, "Ooh, don't go there. You need that's a dodgy area. You don't want to be around there." It's the same with places like Peckham, Brixton, all these kinds of places that you've heard of in sitcom and things like that being portrayed as dodgy places. These are now super cool places to live. And things like Peckham, you have the New Cross School of Art just down the corner. So again, you're seeing a lot of the student accommodation spring up, whether it's purpose built or also landlords getting on the bandwagon, and renting houses out for student accommodation is becoming more and more popular as well. But yeah, that's an ever-changing thing. It will be one neighborhood this year, it will be another neighborhood next year. It always changes.
Good. So
yeah, it does definitely always change. Yeah.
Right. Let's move to the next question. That was, how important is the size of your apartment? As said, it is important for more than 60% people. What strikes me is that for around 30% of tenants, this doesn't play a big role. Even for 15%, people say not important. 5% say not important at all. What is your take on this? Because this was surprising for me.
I think one of the things that comes with living in location is that if you think it's a cool location, generally speaking, a lot of other people will think it's a cool location. In which case, especially London, it's much more expensive to live there. So I suppose if you're not so fussy around the location of where you live, you may be more willing to live in an area that people don't deem as desirable. And then you save the money with the rent. You don't live next to the tube station. You don't live on the main bus route. All of those kinds of things, if you're not so worried about that, I think you'll save money in the long run.
To make a quick note on this one as well, I was very surprised, especially given that, well, I don't want to be referring constantly back to COVID, but because of COVID, we were locked down into our household. So having experienced that, I would have thought that many people would have attributed a lot more importance to the size of their living space, or at least their personal living space. But I guess people move on quickly, and with common spaces open again, both in co-living and student accommodation, I guess that works towards filling a bit of that void that 30% of people are feeling. And just another note is, just to get a bit maybe meta and jump into the data a bit more, a lot of student accommodation, a lot of them are new students, so maybe they did not experience really the same level of restrictions as people living on their own might have. They might have been with family, so it might not play such an important role with them yet. So that's just maybe digging a bit more into the data and what kind of people are responding to the questions.
Yeah, and I guess for a lot of the students, it's just really a sleeping pod, a room. So maybe that's one of the factors. They are mostly out studying or partying or whatever, and in that way, the size of the apartment or the room is not that important. That also relates to the next question. Quite surprising for me too. While more than a half of the respondents think the attractiveness of the interior design is naturally important, for 35%, this doesn't play a big role. So quite evenly distributed. When we when we conducted a tenant survey back in 2021, 20% say it was the most important factor for them as a tenants. However, this was conducted in build-to-rent and commercial buildings. How do you think that the type of property influenced the opinion on this? You can start wherever you want, Arthur.
Yeah, I'll kick off. I think, again, it's maybe, when your resources are restricted, you're going to prioritize some other things. So location first, maybe the living space second, and then we might move towards what your place actually look like. Just a general trend in the youth, well, the way I say it is like, if I'm not part of them, but the general trend in millennials, Gen Z, is they're more about experiences rather than things, and that can be translated into the responses we see here. They're not so interested in how things look. They just want to have better experiences in the place they live. And what is adjacent to that? Maybe having more of a living space and being better located. Another thing I would note here is that it's the results are very similar to how important is like the size of your apartment, but there's a flip here between the important and the very important. So we can see it's second to how big is your living space. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think it comes. I think you sort of mentioned something earlier, Peter, where you said it's literally just a sleeping, like a sleeping pod. How much time do you actually spend in this place? I think a lot of students are going to be out. They're going to be at university. This isn't kind of the main sort of function as maybe like a family home would be, where you would spend more time and you'd want to decorate it nice and all the rest of it. So yeah, perhaps slightly surprising. I seem to remember being I want to live in the nicest student accommodation possible. So maybe slightly surprising, but at the same time, I think when you look at it, and I think probably at the end of the day as well, if you're looking at the cost of living in London, the cost of living in the UK, there's a real crisis with it going on. Something that has a more attractive interior is probably going to cost more than something that doesn't. And we all know, students pleading poverty, eating baked beans on toast for dinner and all the rest of it. Where can they make cost cutting? Maybe it's they live somewhere that's not quite as attractive inside.
I definitely agree. However, this was conducted in mostly the new properties where they already have the attractive design. I guess so. It was surprising that it is not that important in them. Can you tell us, Arthur, a little bit about the type of buildings that this was the survey was conducted in? Because most of the answers were from your company, from distributed.
So actually, we surveyed a lot of different buildings across a lot of different clients, and I would potentially say that actually we have a bit of everything in terms of new and old. So we have a good mix of them. Um, Maybe in the new buildings, the reasons people do not care about the interior design so much is because it's already there. You don't really appreciate things you have, right? You really only miss something once it's gone. But in reality, I think most of student accommodation, especially PBSA, is quite well maintained overall. Even the older buildings, and generally, So that's what I would say on that front.
Right, right. So coming up for the next question, you can see that the results here are even more evenly distributed. More than half of the respondents think that having sports and wellness facilities is not a big priority. 35%. That's an important role for them. I don't actually have any specific question to this one. Instead, I would move to the next one, which is how important is the community for your living experience? And I have hints from the comments of our audience that this was surprising that it wasn't more important for the type of tenants. You could have also seen it in the survey that we conducted with uh, with the with our audience, that community was the second one. What do you think? What is your take on this? Like, why do you think it wasn't more important for such a type of property, which is co-living and student housing, where I would thought that the community is the prime thing, as opposed to, for example, commercial buildings?
If I may start off on this
Yes.
one, maybe again it might be on one part the fact that once you have it you don't really think about it. On the other fact, it might be that the nature of community and student accommodation co-living is a bit different to community as we see it in general in traditional residential spaces. Maybe a community or the role of PBSA is to create a spark so that communities can form organically outside of the management of the company itself. So maybe that is why they are the students and the people living, the young professionals, do not put so much importance on the PBSA is actually building the community, other than maybe that initial spark during Freshers Week, for example, where you are introduced to your colleagues, and then you let communities flourish organically.
Yeah, I would agree, and I suppose just kind of to add a little bit more to it, I suppose. Firstly, I found this quite surprising. I think for me, when I went to university, this was probably quite a big factor of wanting to go to university in the first place. Really, is sort of getting out there and experiencing making new friends and all that kind of thing. But yeah, I guess maybe they don't sort of look at it in the sense of, oh, we've got a Facebook group. Is that really sort of community kind of thing, or we're just using WhatsApp? Is this sort of thing really a solid community that we live in? Or maybe there's just not that much of an emphasis on it any longer, and I'm getting old. There is that kind of thing, Is it age dependent? I don't know, but it does surprise me. It does surprise me a little bit, especially with people moving to new places, meeting people they've never met before, going to university where they don't know anybody. I thought this would play a much bigger role in what did.
What we're talking about the community being built organically, but how do the operators in the student housing and co-living, how can they create, nurture, and engage the community? What are your tips, Ben?
I think you sort of have do's, and that there are also don'ts in there. So I think to begin with, It depends what kind of community you're sort of looking to grow. Some of them have really, especially when you look at like, we do have some results from there as well, is when you look at the Nordic markets, they tend to, for whatever reason, whether it's a cultural thing, they tend to grow the communities pretty successfully by themselves. And you generally tend to find that one of the tenants themselves will take it upon themselves to be like a community manager within the building, and they will actively make posts. You know, this is all done off their own accord. So whether it's a social thing, that could be a part to play in it. I think another thing that I see that does happen is if tenants are posting things in there that need maybe some attention from the building management, from the property management company, is those messages going unanswered and ignored. That's not great, and people will then generally tend to sort of say, well, this doesn't really work for us. Let's do something else, and it doesn't really grow. I think you need to include things in these communities that make it worth tenants. It's worth their while investing in this community, and utilizing it in that sense. You can encourage them with making your own posts, keeping it up to date on your side of things. If there's an event going on, then why not notify the community about it? I also think, we come across clients that sort of have a community up and running, but some of the posts in there can be a little bit negative. This doesn't work, that doesn't work, I'm not happy about this. And I think that just comes down to potentially like a lack of education towards the tenants themselves. Is it as easy as explaining to them, like when you join a Facebook group, these are the rules. Adhere to these rules. If you have an issue, we want to hear about it. We will address that. But the appropriate channel is to address it via this email address, or call this person, or message this person. You don't need to air that in a public forum. No feedback is bad feedback. So I think you have to accept that as well. At times, and it works as well in I've seen it work in co-living spaces, obviously student accommodation, multi-mix, and you can also build a community within a commercial space as well. It has a slightly different feel to it because it's more of a professional community, but it can certainly work.
So this was the first part of the survey, which covered the living experience and what is important for the tenants. One additional question that was here, and again, this was quite surprising for me. Obviously, everything cannot be important, but sustainability practices haven't been that much important for the building community. I think it's something that might change now with the energy prices, but let's talk about it later once we talk about the 2023. Moving to the tech enablement. Here in this part of the survey, we're talking to tenants what kind of technology is important for them in order, again, to have a better way of living in the student housing and co-living. Actually, parcel services or parcel management was the single most important for the tenants. That's, I guess, very good news for Arthur and his company. At second, we had reporting issues. Third, paying for services, keyless access, receiving building news, booking common rooms and services, and again, tracking energy consumption online in real time was the last one, the least important. Moving to this parcel management, both parcel management and issue reporting were at 72%. As a way to, it was important for easier and more enjoyable living. Arthur, being in the business for more than 6 years, what kind of, how does the importance of the frictionless parcel receiving changed over the time, and what what kind of role COVID played in this?
Definitely. So yeah, we were happy to see that this was an important problem, and and that we're trying to solve it. Just to kind of give a bit of a background, so what we asked the tenants here was how important is parcel management, both in terms of having parcel lockers at your location, having a digital solution like ours, and having people who can manage the parcels like a parcel concierge. So it really covers a wide scheme of things here. In terms of what we've seen over the last few years, is we've seen the per capita parcels ordered continuously increasing. Student accommodation was always at quite a high level per student of parcels received and ordered. I mean, start of the year, September time, it's insane. And then come Black Friday, Prime Day, it just gets stupid as well. So that's what we're trying to help with Parcel Tracker. Another thing we saw because of COVID was actually, while sure the amount of parcel students were increasing, ordered increasing, what we actually saw was that new demographics that previously weren't ordering parcels online started ordering. And what happened is a lot of buildings which previously wouldn't have come to us, more residential building with a bit older of a population, now had the issue that student accommodation was having, which was the volumes of deliveries they were getting. So we've had a new group of buildings, new asset class start reaching out to us, which was more the traditional resi. And then after COVID, despite, we're seeing that Amazon's revenue is coming down, which indicates people are buying less online. At least anecdotally, it does not feel like people are buying less online. Every time I talk to a new client or an existing client, they all tell us the same thing. It just feels like the wave and the torrent of parcels never ends. And in terms of how does this actually, why do students and why do different tenants find parcel management so important, is because you're ordering something, you want to make sure it arrives in your hands, right? And also being able to order things when you're not home, you're given a certain level of freedom, right? To know that your items are going to be processed well. And this is actually quite a nice opportunity for landlords because it gives them the ability to capture what we call the Christmas feeling. You're handing a gift to someone effectively. So parcel management is quite important and goes down to those core services that we discussed that you really have to get right in terms of operation.
Good. As I said, almost the same important was reporting issues online. And that can be positive feedback as well, but usually it is issues in the building. Ben, can you describe how our clients use this feature? Maybe share some stories.
Yeah, absolutely. I think reporting issues is probably, when we were sort of going earlier in the conversation, we were talking about getting the fundamentals of your building correct. So, you can build the fanciest building in the world, and if the fundamentals don't work properly, then they're not going to be satisfied. And I think issue reporting is probably one of those fundamentals that you need to get right. If something's wrong, if something's not working, it needs to be fixed as soon as possible, especially if you've got like a tap that's pouring water everywhere, or you've got a noisy neighbor, or whatever, the paint's peeling off the walls, or whatever it might be. So as part of the Spaceflow system, this is something that we look to take care of and make it as easy as possible for tenants and the property managers. So we try and make it as easy as possible for the tenants to report the issue in the first place, so that they can essentially log into the app, open up a ticket, name, apartment number, the system will know that kind of thing, and they will raise a ticket, which will then go to the property manager, or some more sort of Spaceflow side of things, it may be a ticketing manager, someone who is responsible for that specific side of things. And it can then go into the repair process. They can communicate with the tenant via the app. Obviously, another core part of this is the communication. There's nothing worse. I at the moment am trying to change a name on a flight ticket with booking.com, and I get no communication from them whatsoever. So I have no idea what's going on. And that's one of the things that we try to address, so that I can say to you, hey, Peter, I got your issue. Really sorry this has happened. It's been reported with the plumber. She is coming at this time, and we can really keep them in the loop that way. We can also look at integrations with this type of thing as well. So, if a landlord is using a third-party ticketing system, some of our larger clients do this, especially like in Central Europe and stuff, then we can look at not necessarily directly using our ticketing system, but they are still able to raise this ticket into the third-party ticketing system, and it goes directly into their systems, and the result is the same thing. You can stay in touch, you can monitor the repair, and most importantly, you can rate your experience as well. So you can kind of sort of run a customer service satisfaction survey with this as well. So once you've completed all of this and you close the ticket down, the tenant is asked to rate the experience. Now, yes, they're not going to be happy because the pipe burst in the first place, but I think you stand a much better chance of having a satisfied client, or tenant in this case, if you've kept them in the loop, if you've acted quickly. You're much more likely to turn someone that wasn't very happy back to being, yes, there was an issue, but they sorted it.
Plus, I'd said previously, when reporting these issues via an email to maybe a community manager, it really takes a lot of time till it gets the right person, who is in this case the facility management.
Yeah,
and then
absolutely.
again, they are not informed if you don't have a service desk.
You get an email trail that's God knows how long. Perhaps the landlord themselves can't see what's going on with it, so they don't know what's happened with it. It's down to the property management company. There's a real lack, or it's a very disjointed process.
Right. Paying for services online seems to be a very valuable tech enabler for the life in buildings. So what we mean here is paying for stuff like ordering food, ordering cleaning services, or even maybe paying for the fitness class all online. What was also not surprising was that for more than half of the respondents, the smart access is something is valuable tech add-on. This can be for both the room and the common spaces, like maybe the library or dining room, or even the building itself. Getting back to the parcel management, can you describe, Arthur, how this can be enabled and for a better experience to integrate these two features, keyless access for building managers and the parcel management?
Yeah, definitely. Two things here we can do is, one is with certain keyless systems, especially, which give access to the building from the outside, is they can actually give access to couriers who are delivering items, so they don't actually have to ping always flat one. I have been in flat one before, and I do get buzzed a lot to have the parcels delivered into the common spaces. So some key card access systems allow that to be done. Another thing is that we can set up parcel rooms. We have that with quite a few clients, which are access controlled. Basically, when a tenant gets a parcel, they are able to enter the room with a key card and then collect their package and then log out their parcel on an iPad, and then their access to that room is revoked after they collect their package. So there's different ways to enable this technology to do, completely staffless or hybrid parcel management processes, and we've seen it throughout the industry.
Mm-hmm. And I guess another use case can be smart boxes, where actually the courier just enters the PIN code, puts the parcel in the box, and the tenant collects that parcel whenever it suits them, right? They can be out in town, they can be for a vacation or whatever. We have, for example, a good partner on this, the company called Blocks. So that's, I guess, the ideal use case, where the receptionist is not doesn't need to deal with anything. The courier has the access to the building, and they don't even need to deal with the actual person. It just saves so much time to all of the parties, actually. Good. How important is receiving building events and news digital for your easier and more enjoyable living? Here again, for more than half of the respondents, having an online building news feed and events platform is not a high priority. However, for 25%, it is important. For 70%, very important. So again, quite evenly distributed. More than 40% of the respondents agreed that the digital resource booking is priority. So this can be anything from the common areas, any type of services or events that are taking place in that property. This was quite surprising for me because we conducted this survey 1 month ago, where we already, see the crisis in Europe with the energy prices. However, smart metering, so that is tracking energy consumption online, was not important for 60% of the respondents. Do you think that this is something that will change now with the situation that we have?
If I can make a quick comment on this one, the reason I think it's not important is because a lot of PBSAs and universities actually pay for the energy, so the students don't have to pay their own utilities. I think if the students had to pay their own utilities, it would be a very different issue. And I can guess that energy consumption tracking digitally is actually quite important for the landlords right now of these buildings.
For sure.
And depending on how we change the demographic next year for this survey, I think it'll be primarily based on that, the results of this question, and I guess geopolitics as well.
In general, if we run this survey again in a year time, do you think something will change here, or is it something that describes the trends less dependent on time? Yeah,
I think Arthur hit the nail on the head where he said the type of demographic that we have a huge sample from, because it's included in the rent. Perhaps it's not so much of an issue to them. However, if the universities over the next 12 months decide that it's going to be, this is your rent plus you pay the bills, then I think you would probably see from this demographic a huge change in this. And most students would probably want a smart meter and would probably be doing what I do when I work from home, which is pulling my hair out, because my smart meter is literally going up and up and up and up. I also think if we broke it down maybe and looked at co-living spaces, then maybe we might see a slight difference here as well, and maybe it would be more important to them, and not just because of the cost of it, but because of, we're aiming for these net carbon zero buildings, and we're aiming to hit this, the COP27 meeting and everything that's going on with climate change. So I don't think it's just a cost thing. And I think as people become more and more aware about it, this will become more and more and more and more important.
Plus, we should say that soon the EU and still the UK as well, because this was transferred from the EU law, will require the landlords to report on the energy consumption every 3 months, and gradually this will change into real-time monitoring. So this will be anyway required. Good. It was good to go through all of these questions in details. Here we summarized some of the key takeaways from the tenant survey. As you can see, location is the single most important aspect for student living experience, student co-living. For more than 60% of respondents, the size of the room is important, as opposed to tenant interior design, where for 35%, it doesn't play a big role for their experience. More than half of the respondents think that having smart access is valuable tech add-on, and surprisingly, for 60% of the students, monitoring energy consumption in real time online is not important. What do you think about this? How did it surprise you? Do you relate to these key takeaways? What are your own personal takeaways from this survey?
I mean, location is the single most important thing. Doesn't surprise me. If I'm honest, I think the key takeaways, I was a little bit surprised that the smart metering was so low. And the other one that did surprise me as well is, we've not mentioned it here, but is the sports, the sports facilities and things like that. I thought that would play a bigger role in terms of what it did, or would have a higher percentage of people thinking it was an important thing. Less and less people are smoking and all the rest of it, and people are looking to live healthier lifestyles. And with universities, you've got all the sports clubs and all the rest of it. So I thought that would probably play a bigger role than perhaps it did. I think the energy consumption thing, like we just said, I think if we look at it this time next year, we could well see a different result with that kind of thing. So I suppose there's lots of super useful data here. It's, have a look at it, and which of them do you do, which of them don't you do? Have you put too much emphasis on something that perhaps isn't as important as we may have assumed it to be? I think you've also got to look at the demographic that we have it plays a major element in that. Students don't necessarily live in the same ways as someone does in a co-living space, or if we were to include commercial buildings in here, we would probably see something slightly different as well. And also, all go out and get your smart parcel stuff sorted out.
My 2 cents would go back to, revolves around what Ben said and what we said in the start, which is just that get the fundamentals right. Make sure if you have the opportunity to build a building or have a building you manage in a good location, do that. Make sure that the building is well maintained. You have a ticketing system so people are actually able to report the issues. And, if you're providing Wi-Fi, make sure it's good Wi-Fi. It's not in the data here, but we can kind of extrapolate it from what everyone said. So from what the respondent said, make sure that, the fundamental services are there. People live in a nice place, well, in a well-located space, and get your parcel management in order. Don't lose their stuff.
How do you think the operators can act on these key takeaways from the survey? How can they improve the experience, except of the parcel management?
Well, get key ticket tracking, of course. I think potentially just doing an audit of your core services. Make sure that what is the baseline of the services you're offering is actually working. There's often a disconnect between what an operator thinks they're offering versus what they actually are offering. So just make sure to audit that.
And I would say that this is the survey that we ran, but every building operator needs to run this on their own to see how it differs in their own unique community. And we're happy to provide these questions to you, whoever messages us. We're happy to help. So we're running slightly out of time. I would like to get to the Q&A. So seeing if we have any interesting questions here in the audience. Let me see that. Wow, there's a lot of comments I can see. So first question from Martin Elnef. It seems that the wish list is rather concrete, tangible, apart from community. It would be awesome if you could look into the softer aspects like influence, security, lifestyle, health, etc. It seems that you're asking what kind of fish people want rather than asking them if it wouldn't be nice to have a fishing pole instead. Well, I'm not sure what the fish versus fishing pole thing really means, but definitely this survey can be a way longer to ask about those softer aspects rather than material things, let's say. Definitely an input for the next time, I'd say. Feel free to, Martin, elaborate on this, and we can get back to it even maybe after this call via comments on LinkedIn. They stay live, so we will be able to reach out to you.
I'd also suggest on that kind of thing as well as maybe it's worth having a look at doing your own kind of survey as well and running an in-depth survey across your own portfolio. That might be an idea on that one as well. Obviously, if you make a survey so long, people lose interest and you don't get as many people filling them in. But maybe worth having a look at doing something yourself on that one as well. It'd be interesting to see any results if you do decide to do that.
One thing I would like to also say, maybe in the comments, just add some questions you would have liked to potentially ask in next year's survey and things you would like to unpack. And just around that, also when you're running your own surveys, I think the one metric above all that you should be, looking at is potentially Net Promoter Score. that's just to get to see if people like your building. And we as tech companies always run it. It's really how we keep our finger on the pulse. I think really every industry should be running an NPS score.
Yeah, that's the golden rule. That's the basics, I guess. Okay, another question from Martin Elnev. Do you have any thoughts on weight of these factors depending on where is the life cycle the tenant is? For instance, I could imagine that location is important when you move in, but community is what keeps you there later. Can you share some insights on that? Maybe Ben?
I would agree. I would agree on that one, especially from the fact, we go back to this moving into your ideal building in the ideal location, but ultimately if there's no community there, it feels a very lonely place, feels quite maybe potentially a boring place. Then yes, I can see people going, do you know what, I'm going to go and look elsewhere when my tenancy agreement runs out. So, probably one of those things that you kind of want to look at in your community, especially, from a student perspective, if we keep going back to that, is, do you want to be holding events in your building and getting them to meet each other so that, we do these initial introductions and then the community from there begins to grow organically because they know one another. And, it's not a case of come to this event to meet everybody, but it's, who fancies a beer tonight? I've got a spare ticket to the Arsenal. Does anybody want to come with me? I'm not an Arsenal fan, by the way, just to drop that in there. But yeah, I do agree. And you have to sort of go back to that thing as well, as you're always going to get people. I don't live in the same neighborhood as I lived in London because as I've got older, my needs have changed. I don't need to be falling out of pubs at 3 a.m. in Shoreditch anymore. So I don't need to live nearby. I now live south of the river. It's much greener. There's a park that I can go and get a cup of coffee. I can go to the pub and have a pint, but I'm not what I would call in the thick of it any longer. So I think, you kind of change a bit as you get older, as well as your needs change and your family and your private life changes and work as well.
Yeah, let me see if we have any additional question. For some reason, the comments don't load now, so let me refresh again. I cannot see any other questions at the moment. I think we're anyway running out of time since we wanted to host this for 15 minutes to 1 hour. Do you have any final message for the audience?
Just make sure to reach out to us if you have any questions. We've looked at this data for really long. It's imprinted in our eyes, so we're happy to dive deeper into really anything you have questions around. And we'll be running this quite often. So if you have any suggestions for us, let Ben or myself know, and we'll be able to look into it.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So yeah, feel free to drop us a message on LinkedIn, send us an email, and ultimately, thanks for taking the time to listen in today. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you to being great guests, and thank you also for the ends to have more than 60 of you here. Please do follow our LinkedIn page for other events that we will have, other webinars in December, in January, and so on. We will have some very interesting topic from why office design tends to change so fast to why you shouldn't build your own tenant experience software. So stay tuned for that, and thank you for today.